The quickest way to reveal someone's character is to give them power over a stranger. On a warm Friday afternoon outside Atlanta, traffic moved steadily along Highway 285 beneath a bright blue sky. Commuters hurried home from work. Delivery trucks rolled through the right lane. Families filled the roads heading toward weekend plans. Everything seemed ordinary until flashing blue lights appeared behind a dark gray sedan driven by Jasmine Reed. The vehicle signaled and pulled safely onto the shoulder. Cars continued passing by as Officer Kyle Benson stepped out of his patrol vehicle with the confidence of someone who believed he controlled every situation he entered. He adjusted his uniform, glanced toward the sedan, and began walking forward. Inside the car, Jasmine lowered her window and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel. Her expression remained calm. She had no intention of creating a problem. She simply wanted to understand why she had been stopped. Kyle approached the driver's side and immediately adopted a tone that suggested he had already formed an opinion. Before Jasmine could even ask a question, he began speaking as though he already knew everything about her. Jasmine listened quietly. She answered politely. Her calmness seemed to irritate him. Some people expect conflict. When they do not get it, they become frustrated. Kyle appeared to be one of those people. A steady stream of traffic rushed past only a few feet away. The late afternoon sun reflected off windshields and chrome bumpers. Drivers occasionally glanced toward the roadside scene before continuing down the highway. To them, it looked like an ordinary traffic stop. To Jasmine, it was becoming something else. Kyle asked several questions. Jasmine answered each one respectfully. The more composed she remained, the more confident he became. He interpreted her patience as weakness. He mistook courtesy for submission. Around them, the sounds of the highway created a constant backdrop of engines and passing tires. Jasmine glanced briefly at the clock displayed on her dashboard. 4:17 in the afternoon. She still hoped to arrive on time. Somewhere across the city, family members were already gathering for an important event. Nobody on the highway knew that. Kyle certainly did not. He continued speaking as though he alone determined how the encounter would unfold. Then he delivered a sentence that would stay with him for a very long time. You should be grateful I am giving you a warning. The words hung in the warm Georgia air. Jasmine looked at him calmly. She did not argue. She did not challenge him. She simply nodded once. That response seemed to satisfy him. What Kyle failed to recognize was that Jasmine's silence came from confidence, not fear. Imagine standing beside a busy highway convinced you understand exactly who someone is, while knowing absolutely nothing about them. Imagine making judgments before hearing their story. That was the mistake unfolding on the shoulder of Highway 285. 20 minutes later, Officer Kyle Benson would discover that the woman sitting behind that steering wheel belonged to a family he never expected. And by then, it would be far too late to take back the assumptions he had already made. Jasmine Reed remained seated with her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel while traffic rushed past along Highway 285. The late afternoon sun hung low above the Atlanta skyline in the distance, casting long shadows across the shoulder of the road. Officer Kyle Benson stood beside her window, convinced he understood the situation completely. That confidence seemed to grow every time Jasmine responded politely. He expected frustration. He expected arguments. Instead, he found patience. The difference mattered more than he realized. Several vehicles slowed slightly as they passed the scene. A delivery van moved into the far lane. A family in an SUV glanced toward the flashing patrol lights before continuing down the highway. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary traffic stop. To Jasmine, it felt like something different. Kyle continued asking questions. Some were routine. Others seemed unnecessary. Jasmine answered carefully, never raising her voice, never showing irritation. Her calmness only reinforced the assumptions Kyle had already made. People often see what they expect to see. The danger begins when they stop looking for anything else. Jasmine glanced briefly toward the passenger seat, where her phone rested beside a small gift bag. Inside the bag was a wrapped present intended for a family gathering she was trying very hard not to miss. Across town, relatives were already arriving. Messages had been appearing on her phone all afternoon. She ignored them for the moment. Her attention remained on the officer standing outside her window. Kyle looked back toward his patrol vehicle and then returned his attention to Jasmine. His posture suggested he believed he was teaching a lesson. The reality was much different. Imagine standing on the side of a highway believing you are evaluating someone, while every choice you make is quietly revealing something about yourself. That was the story unfolding beneath the Georgia sunlight. Jasmine noticed details most people would have ignored. She noticed the way Kyle interrupted before she finished speaking. She noticed how quickly he reached conclusions. She noticed how little interest he showed in information that challenged those conclusions. Years of experience had taught her that character often appears in small moments long before it reveals itself in large ones. The highway noise continued without interruption. Tires hummed across pavement. Engines echoed beneath overpasses. A warm breeze moved through the trees lining the roadside. Then Jasmine's phone lit up. A call appeared on the screen. She looked at the name for only a second before allowing it to continue ringing. Kyle noticed immediately. "You can take that after we are finished here," he said. Jasmine nodded politely and let the call end. A few seconds later, a message appeared. Then another. She still did not react. What Kyle could not know was that several people were already wondering why she had not arrived. A few miles away, someone was beginning to pay closer attention to the time. Jasmine checked the dashboard clock again. 4:24. The delay was becoming noticeable, yet she remained remarkably calm. Kyle interpreted that calmness as acceptance. In reality, it came from certainty. She knew something he did not. And with every passing minute, the distance between what Kyle believed and what was actually true was becoming smaller. Jasmine Reed remained remarkably composed despite the growing delay. The shoulder of Highway 285 had become a strange pocket of stillness surrounded by constant motion. Cars continued racing past. Sunlight reflected from windshields. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. Yet inside her vehicle, time seemed to be moving differently. Officer Kyle Benson remained beside the driver's window, increasingly convinced that he understood exactly who Jasmine was. The more patient she appeared, the more certain he became. It never occurred to him that patience and confidence often look exactly the same from the outside. Jasmine glanced once more at her phone. Several missed calls now sat on the screen. A new message arrived moments later. She read it briefly before placing the phone face down beside the gift bag. Her expression never changed. Kyle noticed the message but said nothing. Instead, he continued speaking in a tone that suggested he was explaining something rather than investigating it. Around them, the afternoon traffic flowed without interruption. A tractor-trailer rumbled past. A white pickup truck changed lanes. A city bus disappeared beneath a nearby overpass. Life continued. Yet somewhere beyond the highway, people were beginning to wonder why Jasmine had not arrived. Imagine standing beside a busy road believing you are the most important person in the situation, while completely unaware that events are already moving beyond your control. That was Kyle's reality. Every minute seemed to strengthen his confidence. Every minute moved him closer to a truth he never expected. Jasmine listened carefully as he spoke. She noticed how quickly he formed conclusions. She noticed how little information he needed before deciding he was correct. Most importantly, she noticed that he never seemed interested in questioning his own assumptions. Those details mattered. Character often reveals itself long before consequences arrive. The dashboard clock showed 4:29. Jasmine quietly calculated the remaining drive to her destination. Under normal circumstances, she would have arrived already. Instead, she remained on the side of the highway beneath flashing lights and passing traffic. Yet there was no frustration in her expression, no anger, no urgency. The calmness unsettled Kyle more than he wanted to admit. Most people reacted differently in situations like this. Jasmine did not. A dark SUV appeared in the distance and moved steadily through traffic several lanes away. It passed the location without slowing and disappeared ahead. Jasmine barely glanced at it. Kyle did not notice it at all. His attention remained fixed on the conversation he believed he controlled. A few moments later, another message arrived on Jasmine's phone. This time she smiled faintly before placing the device back down. The reaction lasted only a second. Kyle immediately noticed it. "Something funny?" he asked. Jasmine looked at him and shook her head politely. "Not at all," she replied. The answer seemed simple enough, yet something about it lingered. Because for the first time since the stop began, Kyle felt the slightest hint of uncertainty. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. And as the warm Georgia afternoon continued unfolding around them, that uncertainty was about to grow much larger. The uncertainty Kyle Benson felt lasted only a moment before he pushed it aside. Confidence had carried him through countless encounters, and he trusted it more than instinct. Standing beside Jasmine Reed's vehicle, he convinced himself that her calm demeanor meant nothing. Yet the feeling lingered somewhere in the back of his mind. The afternoon sun continued lowering toward the horizon, painting the highway in shades of gold and amber. Traffic moved steadily past the shoulder. The world seemed unaware that something important was slowly unfolding beside the road. Jasmine remained composed. Her hands rested comfortably near the steering wheel. The gift bag remained on the passenger seat. Her phone stayed silent for nearly a minute before lighting up once again. Another message. Then another. She glanced briefly at the screen before setting it down. Kyle noticed the growing number of notifications. "You seem pretty popular today," he said. Jasmine offered a polite smile. "It is a family day," she replied. The answer sounded simple. Ordinary. Yet something about the way she said it made him pause. Around them, vehicles flowed through the late afternoon traffic. A motorcycle passed in the far lane. A city maintenance truck rolled beneath the overpass ahead. Everything appeared normal. But somewhere beyond the highway, several people were beginning to ask the same question. Where was Jasmine? The dashboard clock now read 4:33. She should have arrived long ago. Kyle continued asking questions, though even he seemed less certain about why he was still standing there. The conversation had drifted beyond anything related to the original stop. Jasmine answered politely whenever necessary, but she volunteered very little. The less she said, the more Kyle seemed compelled to keep talking. Imagine believing you are gathering information while unknowingly revealing more about yourself than the person you are questioning. That was exactly what was happening. Jasmine listened carefully. Every comment, every assumption, every conclusion. She never challenged him. She never corrected him. She simply observed. A warm breeze swept across the shoulder of the road. Leaves rustled in nearby trees. Then something changed. A dark SUV appeared again in the distance. This time it slowed. Unlike the earlier vehicle, this one moved deliberately toward the shoulder. Behind it, another black vehicle followed at a measured distance. Kyle noticed them immediately. His posture straightened. His eyes followed the approaching vehicles. Jasmine remained calm, almost as though she had expected them. The first SUV activated a turn signal and carefully pulled onto the shoulder several yards behind Kyle's patrol vehicle. The second followed moments later. Neither vehicle displayed flashing lights. Neither appeared rushed. Yet their arrival immediately changed the atmosphere. Several passing drivers slowed slightly to look. Kyle glanced from the SUVs back to Jasmine. For the first time since the stop began, he seemed genuinely uncertain. Jasmine checked the time once more and quietly exhaled. "Looks like they finally found me," she said. The statement was calm, matter of fact, yet something about it caused Kyle's stomach to tighten. Because suddenly the delay, the phone calls, the messages, and the strange confidence she carried all afternoon no longer felt random. They felt connected. And as the doors of the first SUV slowly opened, Officer Kyle Benson began to realize he might not know nearly as much about Jasmine Reed as he thought. Jasmine Reed watched calmly as the doors of the first SUV opened. The reaction from Officer Kyle Benson was immediate, even if he tried to hide it. His posture changed. His confidence remained, but it was no longer effortless. Questions had begun forming in his mind. The shoulder of Highway 285 suddenly felt much smaller than it had a few minutes earlier. Traffic continued moving past in steady streams. The afternoon sun reflected from chrome bumpers and glass windows. Yet all attention now seemed focused on the two dark vehicles parked behind the patrol car. A tall man in a navy suit stepped out of the first SUV. Another professionally dressed individual emerged from the second. Neither appeared hurried. Neither seemed concerned. They simply walked toward Jasmine's vehicle with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Kyle watched carefully. He expected introductions. He expected explanations. Instead, he saw something stranger. Jasmine smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a dramatic smile. Just the relaxed smile of someone seeing familiar faces. The man in the navy suit stopped beside the driver's window and asked if everything was all right. Jasmine nodded. "I am fine," she said. "Just running a little behind schedule." The answer sounded ordinary, yet it seemed to carry meaning that Kyle did not understand. The man glanced briefly toward Kyle before returning his attention to Jasmine. "Everyone has been asking where you are," he said. Your father was about to leave and come find you himself. For the first time since the stop began, Kyle heard the word that mattered. Father. The simple reference immediately changed the way he viewed the situation. Earlier, Jasmine had mentioned a family gathering. He had dismissed it as irrelevant. Now he was beginning to suspect it was very important. Around them, vehicles continued rushing down the highway. A delivery truck thundered past. A sports car disappeared beneath the overpass ahead. Life continued moving normally. Yet the atmosphere on the shoulder had become completely different. Imagine realizing that the person you spent the last 20 minutes judging belongs to a world you never bothered trying to understand. Imagine discovering that every assumption you made was based on incomplete information. That was the uncomfortable feeling beginning to settle over Kyle. Jasmine checked her phone again. More messages had arrived. Several missed calls remained on the screen. The man in the navy suit laughed softly. Your family is worried, he said. You know how your father gets when people are late. Jasmine shook her head and smiled. Trust me, she replied. I know. The exchange sounded simple enough, yet Kyle noticed something important. Every person who arrived treated Jasmine with genuine respect. Not because she demanded it, not because she expected it, because it seemed natural. The realization created a question he could no longer ignore. Who exactly was she? The dashboard clock now read 4:38. The family gathering was already underway. The SUV drivers appeared patient. Jasmine remained calm. Kyle, however, was no longer certain about anything. Somewhere in the distance, another vehicle approached along the highway. And although he did not know it yet, the answer to every question forming in his mind was about to arrive. The vehicle approaching from the distance moved steadily through the afternoon traffic before exiting the flow of cars and making its way toward the shoulder. Officer Kyle Benson watched it carefully. By now, the questions in his mind had grown impossible to ignore. Earlier that afternoon, he had believed this stop would be forgotten within minutes. Instead, every passing moment seemed to introduce another piece of a story he did not understand. The warm Georgia sunlight reflected from the approaching vehicle as it slowed and pulled in behind the two SUVs already parked near the shoulder. Traffic continued moving along Highway 285, but the atmosphere around the stop had changed completely. Jasmine Reed remained calm. The men who had arrived earlier stood nearby, speaking quietly while occasionally checking their phones. None of them appeared concerned. None appeared surprised. Their patience suggested they had expected exactly this sequence of events. Kyle noticed that detail immediately. The driver stepped from the newly arrived vehicle and adjusted his jacket before looking toward Jasmine. His face brightened the moment he saw her. There you are, he said with a smile. Your father has been asking about you every 5 minutes. The words landed harder than he intended. Kyle felt the meaning immediately. Another reference to her father. Another indication that whoever was waiting for Jasmine was not an ordinary relative. Jasmine laughed softly and shook her head. That sounds like him, she replied. The exchange felt natural, familiar, comfortable. It was the kind of conversation people have around someone they respect and know well. Kyle found himself studying every detail. The professional clothing, the expensive vehicles, the confidence of the people around her, the concern they showed when discussing her family gathering. None of it matched the assumptions he had formed at the beginning of the stop. Imagine realizing that every conclusion you reached was based on a fraction of the information available. Imagine watching an entire picture emerge after spending 20 minutes focused on only one corner of it. That was exactly what was happening. Jasmine checked her phone again. Another message had arrived. This time she smiled more openly. One of the men beside her glanced at the screen and laughed. Your father just sent another reminder, he said. Apparently the guest of honor is getting impatient. Guest of honor. The phrase caught Kyle's attention immediately. His eyes shifted from Jasmine to the group around her. The pieces still did not fit together completely, but they were moving in that direction. The dashboard clock showed 4:43. Jasmine finally reached for the seat belt and prepared to continue her trip. Yet before she could move, one of the men looked toward Kyle and politely asked whether there was anything else needed before they left. The question was respectful, professional, but it carried an unexpected weight. For the first time all afternoon, Kyle struggled to answer immediately. Because somewhere beneath the sounds of passing traffic and the glow of the late afternoon sun, he could feel the truth getting closer. He still did not know exactly who Jasmine Reed's family was. But he was beginning to understand that the answer was far more important than he ever imagined. Officer Kyle Benson looked from Jasmine Reed to the group standing beside the SUVs and realized he no longer understood the situation at all. Only 30 minutes earlier, he had believed this was a routine stop on the side of Highway 285. Now every detail seemed different. The people arriving were not anxious. They were not confused. They behaved as though Jasmine's delay had been inconvenient, but never truly concerning. That level of confidence comes from certainty, and certainty comes from knowing exactly who someone is. The late afternoon sun continued dropping toward the horizon, bathing the highway in warm light. Traffic flowed past without interruption. Yet on the shoulder, time seemed suspended. Jasmine stepped out of her vehicle for the first time since the stop began. She smoothed her blazer, picked up the small gift bag from the passenger seat, and smiled at the people who had arrived. The interaction looked effortless, familiar, respectful. One of the men checked his watch and laughed softly. "If we do not leave soon, your father is going to start calling everyone again." Jasmine shook her head. "That sounds about right," she replied. Kyle listened carefully. Every mention of her father seemed to carry more weight than the last. Then another vehicle approached. Unlike the others, this one drew immediate attention from everyone present. The men near the SUVs straightened slightly. Jasmine's expression softened. The vehicle pulled onto the shoulder and came to a stop. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the rear door opened. A distinguished man stepped out wearing a dark suit. His presence changed the atmosphere instantly. Not because he demanded attention, because he naturally received it. Jasmine smiled. "Dad," she said. The man walked forward and greeted her warmly before looking at the group around them. Then his eyes settled on Kyle. The officer felt a strange sensation in his chest. Recognition. He knew that face. He had seen it on television interviews, government announcements, and official press conferences. The realization arrived all at once. The man standing before him was Attorney General David Reed. The silence that followed seemed louder than the traffic rushing past the highway. Kyle stared. The pieces finally connected. The family gathering. The phone calls. The SUVs. The concern. The respect everyone showed Jasmine. Nothing had been random. David Reed glanced toward his daughter. "We have all been waiting for you," he said with a smile. "Your grandmother refused to let dinner begin until you arrived." Jasmine laughed softly. The exchange was ordinary. Family. Human. Yet for Kyle, it changed everything. Earlier that afternoon, he had seen only what he expected to see. He never stopped to consider who Jasmine actually was. David Reed then turned toward him and extended a hand politely. "Good afternoon, officer," he said. Kyle shook it automatically. His confidence had vanished. Not because of the title, not because of the position, but because he suddenly understood how little he had known about the person sitting behind that steering wheel. Jasmine watched quietly. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just calm understanding. Because the real lesson had never been about her family. It was about how someone chooses to treat another person before they know who that person is. The realization stayed with Officer Kyle Benson long after the introductions ended. Attorney General David Reed never raised his voice. He never demanded special treatment. In fact, the most surprising part of the encounter was how ordinary he seemed. He asked Jasmine if she was all right. He thanked the people who had come looking for her. He even wished Kyle a good afternoon before turning his attention back to his daughter. Yet that simple professionalism made the lesson impossible to ignore. Jasmine gathered her belongings while traffic continued flowing along Highway 285. The sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, casting long golden reflections across the highway barriers. The family gathering was still waiting. The delay had become a story everyone would likely laugh about later. But for Kyle, the afternoon was becoming something much more serious. David Reed listened carefully as Jasmine briefly described what had happened. She spoke calmly. She did not exaggerate. She did not complain. She simply explained the sequence of events. The Attorney General nodded thoughtfully and asked only a few questions. Then he looked toward one of the men standing nearby. "Make sure the appropriate records are preserved," he said. The instruction sounded routine, administrative. Yet Kyle understood exactly what it meant. Modern traffic stops create documentation. Dash cameras, body cameras, dispatch logs, radio communications, timelines, records. Every decision leaves a trail. Around them, the atmosphere remained calm. Nobody threatened anyone. Nobody argued. The conversation stayed professional from beginning to end. That professionalism somehow made the moment even more powerful. Imagine realizing that your actions are about to be evaluated not because of who was involved, but because every action deserves accountability. That was the reality Kyle now faced. Jasmine noticed the change immediately. Earlier that afternoon, he had appeared completely certain of himself. Now he seemed quieter, more reflective, less interested in assumptions, more aware of consequences. The difference was impossible to miss. David Reed placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder and smiled. "Your grandmother is still waiting," he said, "and she has already informed everyone that dinner cannot begin without you." Jasmine laughed. The people around them laughed as well. The moment felt warm and human. Family, respect, connection, everything the afternoon should have been about from the beginning. One of the men near the SUVs received a phone call and quietly confirmed that arrangements had been made to review the documentation associated with the stop. Again, nobody treated it like a punishment. It was simply procedure, standard review, accountability, the same process that should apply to everyone. The realization struck Kyle harder than any criticism could have. The issue had never been Jasmine's family. The issue had been the choices he made before he knew anything about her. As the group prepared to leave, Jasmine looked back toward him one final time. Her expression remained calm. There was no anger there, no desire for revenge, only quiet disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. Because respect should never depend on discovering who someone's family is. It should exist from the very beginning. And standing beside the fading sunlight of a Georgia highway, Kyle Benson finally understood that truth. As the last rays of sunlight stretched across Highway 285, the convoy of vehicles slowly prepared to leave. The dark SUVs merged back into traffic one by one. Jasmine Reed placed the gift bag carefully on the passenger seat and exchanged a final smile with her father before returning to her car. The entire scene remained calm, respectful, and remarkably ordinary. Yet for Officer Kyle Benson, nothing about the afternoon felt ordinary anymore. He stood beside his patrol vehicle watching as the people he had spent the last hour misunderstanding prepared to continue with their day. The highway roared with the familiar sounds of engines and tires. Commuters hurried home. The city moved forward. But Kyle found himself standing still, replaying every moment of the encounter in his mind. Earlier that afternoon, he believed he understood exactly who Jasmine was. He had formed opinions before learning facts. He had reached conclusions before gathering information. Now, with the truth standing clearly before him, those assumptions felt impossible to defend. Jasmine started her engine and prepared to leave. Before pulling away, she lowered her window one final time. The expression on her face remained exactly the same as it had been throughout the entire stop. Calm, respectful, composed. "Have a safe evening, officer," she said. The words were simple. There was no sarcasm, no anger, no attempt to embarrass him. Somehow that made them even more powerful. Kyle nodded and wished her a safe drive as well. Then she rolled up the window and guided her car back into traffic. Within seconds, she became just another vehicle moving along the highway toward her family. Yet the lesson she left behind remained. Imagine discovering that the most important thing about a person was never their family name, their position, or their connections. Imagine realizing that the real test of character happens before any of those things are known. That realization stayed with Kyle long after the vehicles disappeared from sight. In the weeks that followed, documentation from the stop was reviewed through normal procedures. Dash camera footage, body camera recordings, dispatch records. The process moved exactly the way professional accountability is supposed to work. No special treatment, no dramatic confrontations, just facts. Verified facts, the kind that allow people to learn from mistakes and improve. Meanwhile, life continued for Jasmine and her family. The delayed gathering eventually became a family story told around dinner tables and holiday celebrations. Yet beneath the laughter remained a serious truth. Respect should never arrive after a revelation. It should exist from the beginning. The sun finally disappeared below the horizon as traffic lights illuminated the Atlanta skyline. Highway 285 returned to normal. Another evening, another shift, another day. But somewhere in the memory of everyone involved, one lesson remained impossible to forget. Character does not change when power enters the conversation. It simply reveals what was already there. And on that warm Georgia afternoon, the badge gave one man authority. His choices revealed everything else.